The capital city of Zorathis was a dazzling sight, suspended in midair like a star tethered to the heavens. The towering buildings gleamed with a shimmering, metallic sheen, and the streets were lined with bright bioluminescent flowers that glowed softly in the dusk. It was a city that seemed to defy the laws of nature, a place where the wind whispered through the floating structures, carrying with it the fragrance of faraway jungles and the promise of endless possibilities. But beneath the city's beauty, there was a darker undercurrent. Political power struggles played out in shadowed corridors, and beneath the pristine facade of the royal palace, a broken princess lingered, forgotten and dismissed. Kaylee's had once soared above the city, her wings wide and powerful, a symbol of strength and grace to her people. The alien wings that sprouted from her back were not just a mark of her royal lineage, they were her essence, her pride. To the people of Zorathis, a ruler who could not fly was unworthy of leadership. And for Kaylee's, her broken wings had shattered more than just her ability to take flight. They had shattered her identity. After the accident that had left her wings scarred and tattered, every kingdom she had turned to for help had rejected her. To them, she was no longer useful. She was nothing but a reminder of weakness. The rejection had started with whispers, murmurs in the hallways of power, and gradually escalated into public dismissals. Her family, too, had begun to view her as a burden. They offered her a chance to stay within the walls of the palace, but with every passing day, it felt more like a gilded cage than a place of refuge. And so Kaylee's, the once proud princess, now found herself alone in the grand chamber of the palace, her broken wings tucked tightly against her back. She sat by the window, staring out at the city below, watching as the other royals with their unbroken wings glided through the skies. They had power, they had respect, they had everything Kaylee's could no longer claim. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Kaylee's didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her personal attendant, a quiet, loyal servant named Aris, stepped into the room. "My princess," Aris said gently, bowing his head in respect. "There is someone here to see you, a human mechanic. They say he has come to repair the palace's systems." Kaylee's didn't respond immediately. The thought of another human coming into her life, a species she had never truly connected with, felt exhausting. But the fact that Aris had mentioned him made her curious. After all, what harm was there in a brief encounter? She had nothing left to lose. "Send him in," Kaylee's replied, her voice a mix of disinterest and lingering hope. A moment later, the door creaked open, and in walked a man whose appearance immediately caught Kaylee's off guard. Finn, a human mechanic, stood in the doorway, his dark eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and caution. His clothes were simple, worn from the rough work he had clearly done throughout his career. His face was sharp, with the kind of weathered look that came from years of survival, not elegance. But there was something in his eyes. It wasn't pity, it wasn't awe, it was understanding. "Your Highness," Finn said, bowing slightly but not too deeply, as if he wasn't sure what kind of protocol he was supposed to follow. "I'm Finn. I was hired to repair the palace's central power grid. Seems there's been some interference with the energy conduits. I can fix it for you, if you'd like." Kaylee's raised an eyebrow. His presence alone was what had piqued her attention. It was his tone. Unlike the other nobles and dignitaries who spoke to her with caution or masked condescension, Finn spoke to her as though she were just another person. "You are the mechanic?" Kaylee's asked, her voice soft but laced with a hint of skepticism. "Do you think you can repair the energy grid of a royal palace?" Finn gave a slight grin, his eyes glinting with a quiet confidence. "I've repaired a lot worse than that, Your Highness. A broken machine is just a challenge to overcome. It's the broken people who are the real puzzle." Kaylee's felt her breath hitch in her chest. She was used to hearing herself described as something broken, but never quite like that. It was as though Finn had seen through her outer shell, straight to the place inside that no one else dared to look. She quickly masked the sting of his words and gave him a nod. "Then," she said slowly, "you may proceed with your repairs." As Finn moved to the workbench to prepare his tools, Kaylee's couldn't help but watch him. He was focused, methodical, as if his entire world existed in the delicate machinery in front of him. She wondered what it must have been like for him, so comfortable in his own purpose, so at ease with his identity. She, on the other hand, felt completely adrift. She hadn't flown in years, and every time she looked at her wings, her once proud wings, she was reminded of her weakness, her failure. Her wings were no longer a sign of beauty, but of shame. Finn paused in his work, his eyes catching hers as he wiped his hands on a rag. You know, he said casually, I've worked with all kinds of machines, broken ones, strange ones no one thought could be repaired. But sometimes it's not just the machine that's broken. Sometimes the person using it is, too. Kaylee stiffened, her face flushed. She wasn't sure if it was the vulnerability of his words or the way he had so casually addressed her brokenness that made her want to look away. But she didn't. I'm not broken, Kaylee said, more firmly than she felt. I just need a different way of being fixed, but that's none of your concern. Finn's expression softened, his hands still. Maybe not, but if you ever decide you want to fix more than just the systems in this palace, I'll be around. Kaylee frowned at his words, unsure of what to make of them. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like she was more than just her damaged wings or her role in the kingdom. As he continued his work, Kaylee sat in silence. Something was stirring inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time, hope. The next morning, Kaylee stood in the palace's grand hall, her gaze fixed on the view beyond the open balcony. The wind blew softly through the tall, golden pillars that held up the palace's floating structure. The sky was a pale shade of violet, dotted with floating islands in the distance. It should have been peaceful. But inside her heart, there was only turbulence. She hadn't expected to see Finn again so soon, but as the morning hours ticked by, his presence in the palace had become a strange, unwelcome comfort. His words from yesterday echoed in her mind. Sometimes it's not just the machine that's broken. Sometimes the person using it is, too. He had not treated her like an object to be fixed, nor had he made her feel like a fragile thing to be protected. It was almost as if he didn't see her brokenness at all, but simply another person with a job to do. She barely registered the sound of footsteps approaching, but when she turned, it was as if the air had shifted. A tall figure stood in the doorway, a man who had become all too familiar over the past few weeks. Jaren, the ambassador from the rival kingdom of Arkil, was a constant reminder of everything Kaylee's had lost. His piercing eyes, cold and calculating, looked her up and down. His posture was that of someone who expected to be listened to, someone who thought the world owed him something. His presence was a reminder that she was nothing without her wings. Your Highness, Jaren said with a mock bow, his voice thick with condescension. I trust the human mechanic has been of service to you. Kaylee's met his gaze with a mixture of disdain and exhaustion. He's completing the repairs, as requested. Good, Jaren replied, stepping closer. But I trust you understand the importance of your condition. The wings, they are a symbol of your people, and a symbol of their pride. The sooner you can restore them, the sooner you'll stop being seen as a liability. Kaylee's clenched her fists at her sides, her wings instinctively tensing in the air. Her once-proud wings, now broken and frail, drooped heavily against her back. She could feel the weight of Jaren's words. Every kingdom, every person she had encountered had looked at her and seen only a failure. She had become a pawn, discarded when no longer useful. Jaren continued, his voice smooth, almost friendly. There are some arrangements being made regarding your future. Perhaps when your wings are restored, you can consider my offer. I believe the King of Arkil would welcome you as a worthy ally. You might finally find a place where you truly belong. Kaylee's heart twisted at the thought. She had heard the whispers. Jaren's offer was not one of respect. It was a marriage proposal, a political maneuver to solidify an alliance. She was nothing more than a bargaining chip. I don't need your arrangements, Kaylee said, her voice cold, the words heavy with the burden of truth. And I don't need anyone's pity. Jaren's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. I'm simply trying to be practical, Your Highness. You may think yourself above this, but the truth is, there is only so much time before even your people lose patience. I'm not interested in your offer, Kaylee's replied sharply. I've already made my decision. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps we should part ways. Jaren's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation passing through them, but he didn't push the issue further. He knew better than to cross her outright. Her position, no matter how fragile, still carried weight. With a slight bow, he turned to leave, but not without one last remark. Very well, but remember, Your Highness, time is not on your side. I will be in touch. As soon as Jaren left, Kaylee's let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The air in the room felt suffocating, the weight of her reality pressing in on her. She was trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, surrounded by political games and rival kingdoms, all of whom saw her as nothing more than a tool for power. But in that moment, a thought flickered in the back of her mind, Finn. He hadn't seen her as broken. He hadn't looked at her wings with pity or disdain. He had simply seen a challenge, a puzzle to fix. Kaylee's turned away from the balcony, the breeze ruffling her hair. She found herself walking toward the workroom, the room where Finn had been busy with his repairs. He had mentioned needing her help to understand her wings more fully in order to restore them properly. She hadn't considered his request at first, but now something felt different. Maybe it wasn't just about fixing her wings. Maybe it was about fixing herself. When Kaylee's arrived at the workroom, Finn was hunched over a pile of parts, his hands moving with practiced ease as he connected wires and components. The room was cluttered with tools and half-finished projects. It smelled of grease and metal, but there was something oddly comforting about it. She paused at the doorway, watching him for a moment before speaking. "Finn," she said, her voice quieter than she intended, "we need to talk." Finn looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't say anything at first, but there was a subtle shift in his expression, a warmth, a recognition that made her heart beat a little faster. "I'm listening," he said, his voice calm but steady. Kaylee's took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, the weight of her vulnerability suddenly too much to bear. "I don't know if I can ever be the person I was. The wings, they're broken, and they're a part of me I can't get back. No matter how hard I try, I'm not like everyone else." Finn stood up, setting down the tool in his hand. He didn't come closer immediately, but his eyes never left hers. There was no judgment in them, only understanding. "You're right," he said after a long pause. "You're not like everyone else, and that's the point, isn't it? You're Kaylee's, not your wings, not what anyone else expects you to be." Kaylee's blinked, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She wasn't her wings. She wasn't her past. She was her own person, with or without them. "I can help you fix them," Finn continued, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "But first, you have to believe that they don't define who you are." Kaylee's looked at him, her heart racing. No one had ever said that to her, not like this. She had always thought of herself as the sum of her wings, her royal status, her duties. But Finn's words made her realize something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. She was more than that. "Do you really think I can?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Finn gave her a small smile, his eyes sincere. "I think you've already taken the hardest step. You're here asking for help. That's the first step in rebuilding something." Kaylee's felt something inside her stir, an unfamiliar hope, a feeling she had long buried under layers of doubt and fear. She wasn't sure if it was possible to fix her wings or even what that would mean, but she knew one thing for certain. This was the first time in years that she felt like there was a chance for something new. The palace guards escorted Kaylee's through the labyrinthine halls, the golden walls of the palace echoing with each step. Her mind raced as she tried to process the news. The delegation from Arkell had arrived, Jaren's people. The thought of facing them again, knowing what they wanted, made her stomach churn. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Finn's. He had been quiet ever since the guards arrived, a silent understanding passing between them. Despite the looming political storm, he had insisted on accompanying her to meet the delegation. He said it was important for her to stand tall, no matter the pressure. The vast courtyard outside was filled with the muted hum of the city's floating platforms. The soft glow of bioluminescent flowers flickered beneath their feet, casting an ethereal light as Kaylee stepped out into the open air. Her wings, once so grand and graceful, hung limply against her back. Even after everything she had done with Finn, working together to repair the wing mechanism, restoring some of her lost strength, she still felt the weight of her brokenness. The delegation was gathered just beyond the gates, their attire a combination of dark, ornate robes and shining metallic armor that symbolized Arkell's opulence. Jaren stood at the forefront, his figure imposing and unmoving. His cold eyes scanned Kaylee's as she approached, but she refused to look away. She wasn't going to shrink back from this anymore. "Your Highness," Jaren greeted, his tone a sharp contrast to Finn's warm, open nature. "It's good to see you've recovered." He emphasized the word, his gaze flicking briefly to her wings. Kaylee's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood tall, feeling Finn's presence just behind her, a silent pillar of support. "Jaren," Kaylee's replied evenly, "what brings you to my palace today? Has your king decided to finally make a decision about our alliance?" Jaren's lips curled into a thin, almost pitying smile. "Not quite, Your Highness, but my king is still very interested in pursuing an agreement with you. After all, you are the last of your line. Your wings, however damaged, are a symbol of your people's strength. a strength your kingdom could use. But if they are beyond repair, well, that's a different matter, isn't it? The words stung, but Kaylee's forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't afford to show weakness now, not in front of Jaren and certainly not in front of Finn. Finn stepped forward, a calm but firm presence beside her. "It's not just about wings," he said, his voice carrying an edge that surprised both Kaylee's and Jaren. "You're here because of power, but you're underestimating what real strength is." Jaren turned to face Finn, his eyes narrowing. "And you are?" "A mechanic," Finn replied, his eyes steady. "But don't mistake my profession for weakness. If you're here to mock her because of her wings, then you're wasting your time. She's more than that. We both are." Jaren's expression faltered for the briefest of moments before he regained his composure. "Perhaps," he said, his voice laced with a touch of amusement. "But what do you really know about power?" "I know that power isn't just about control or dominance," Finn said, his words slow, deliberate. "True power is about choice. Kaylee's is choosing to rise above her circumstances, not because of her wings, but because she's willing to fight for something greater than herself." Kaylee's felt something inside her shift, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Maybe it wasn't about the wings. Maybe it was about what she could do with them, broken or not. "Enough," Kaylee's finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Jaren, I've heard your offer, but I don't need your kingdom's approval to be whole, and I don't need to prove myself to anyone. My wings will heal when I choose to let them heal, not because of some political alliance or your pity." Jaren's eyes flicked from her to Finn, his mouth tightening. He had been expecting a different response, perhaps one of weakness, perhaps one that would allow him to take control. But Kaylee's defiance caught him off guard. "You misunderstand, Your Highness," he said, his voice cool. "This isn't about pity. This is about survival. If you refuse our alliance, there will be consequences. Arkel's influence can help you reclaim your throne or leave you stranded on an island of your own making. Think carefully." Kaylee stood still, her heart pounding. His words weren't just empty threats. She had seen enough of Arkel's tactics to know they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But she wasn't going to be a pawn anymore. "I have made my decision," Kaylee said firmly. "Arkel's king will have to find another way to expand his reach. I won't be his tool." Finn stepped forward again, his stance protective, though he said nothing. Kaylee's could feel the solidarity between them, the unspoken understanding that no matter how much the world pressed down on them, they had each other's backs. Jaren's expression darkened, his features stiffening. He turned to his delegation with a curt nod, signaling the end of the meeting. "So be it," he said, "but remember, Your Highness, the clock is ticking." As the Arkel delegation filed out, Kaylee's exhaled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She turned to Finn, who offered a slight nod, his expression unreadable but supportive. "I think that went well," Finn said with a wry grin. "At least you didn't break anything." Kaylee's couldn't help but smile, a small, relieved laugh escaping her lips. "It's not about breaking things, it's about not letting them break me." The day wore on, and Kaylee's found herself wandering the gardens of the palace. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. As she walked, her thoughts kept returning to the meeting with Jaren, to his coldness and the threat he had left lingering in the air. She knew he wouldn't give up easily. Arkel's ambitions were vast, and Kaylee's, despite her newfound resolve, was still a target. But there was something else she couldn't shake. Finn, his words had done something to her. They had cracked through the walls she had built around her, the walls that kept everyone, including herself, at a distance. He hadn't seen her as broken. He had seen her as someone who could still choose to move forward. She stopped at the edge of the garden, her gaze lifted to the horizon. The wind ruffled her hair, and for the first time in years, Kaylee's felt a spark of something inside her. Maybe her wings weren't her weakness. Maybe they were her chance to reclaim something more than just a throne. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the weight of her thoughts away. When she opened them again, there was a new fire in her eyes, a fire not to be extinguished. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Finn and Kaylee's worked tirelessly on the wing repairs, the mechanical framework that would give Kaylee's a chance at flight again. Every day, they faced new challenges, pieces of technology she had never seen before, systems that required adjustments beyond the limits of what she thought was possible. But there was something about Finn's presence that made it all feel achievable. Despite her initial reluctance, Kaylee's found herself drawn deeper into the process. Each time they made progress, Each time she felt her wings respond to the subtle adjustments Finn made, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope. But there were times, late in the evenings when they were alone, that the weight of what she was attempting to do became too much. The question loomed over her constantly, what if it wasn't enough? She stood now in the small workshop, staring at her wings as they spread slowly outward, the mechanical enhancements that Finn had attached humming softly in the air. She could feel the weight of them, the familiar sensation of flight just out of reach. But it was different now. They didn't feel like a part of her anymore. They felt like a foreign object. "You're doing it, Kayleigh," Finn said, his voice calm and steady behind her. "They're responding better than I expected." "I'm still broken, Finn," she murmured, not turning to face him. "Even if these wings work again, I'll never be the person I was. I'll never be the princess they wanted me to be. They'll always see me as weak." Finn stepped closer, his boots soft on the stone floor. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he stood beside her, letting the silence stretch between them for a moment. "You don't have to be that person anymore," he said gently. "You can be someone new, someone who's strong because they've chosen to be, not because of their wings or their title, but because of what they can do with their own hands, their own heart." Kayleigh turned to face him, the uncertainty in her eyes matching the battle within her. "You don't understand, Finn. You're asking me to give up everything, everything I was raised to be. My wings, my position, my identity. Those were what made me someone. Without them, I'm nothing." "You're not nothing," Finn replied firmly. "You're a person with a future, a person who deserves to fly whether or not anyone else agrees with that." Kayleigh swallowed hard. His words stirred something deep inside her, something that she had buried for far too long. There was a truth there that she didn't want to admit. Maybe she had spent too long hiding behind the image of what others thought she should be. Maybe she had let her wings define her for too long. The hum of the wings flickered as she tested them once more, the mechanical components adjusting with a soft whir. It wasn't perfect yet. There was still so much work to do. But in that moment, she allowed herself to believe it might be possible. A sudden, harsh knock at the door broke her concentration. "Your Highness," a guard's voice called through the door. "There's someone here to see you, an urgent matter." Kayleigh's heart skipped a beat. She glanced at Finn, who looked equally unsettled. She hadn't been expecting anyone, certainly not at this hour. "Let them in," Kayleigh said, her voice a mixture of dread and caution. She turned back to Finn. "Stay close, something feels wrong." The door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Aris, her personal attendant, his face pale with worry. "Your Highness," Aris began, his voice tremulous, "I'm afraid we've received troubling news. There's been a significant shift in Arkel's strategy. The king has called for a final attempt to secure your loyalty by force if necessary." Kayleigh's heart dropped. "What do you mean by force?" "They're sending an army, Your Highness," Aris said, his voice trembling with fear. "Jaren has mobilized a battalion. They plan to bring you in whether you want to go or not. It's not just a threat anymore. It's happening now." Kayleigh's mind raced. Her thoughts immediately turned to Finn. The wings. The work we've done, it might not be enough. We might not have enough time. Finn stepped forward, his jaw clenched in determination. "We have to move. Now, this isn't just about the wings anymore. It's about survival." Kayleigh nodded, her resolve hardening. She had been avoiding this moment, the moment when her past would come crashing into her present. But it had arrived faster than she'd expected. "We'll leave tonight," she said firmly, her voice unwavering. "We'll go to the mountains. If I have to rebuild everything from the ground up, I'll do it. They can't control me anymore." Later that evening, Kayleigh and Finn gathered their supplies in haste, preparing to leave the palace under the cover of darkness. The city was already on edge. The guards were whispering of the incoming Arkel forces, and the streets were flooded with rumors of impending war. Kayleigh couldn't shake the thought that every step she took in this direction was pulling her further away from the life she had known. The life that had defined her, the life that had been stripped from her so violently. But she knew that she could never go back to that world. It no longer fit who she was. They left the palace under the cover of night, slipping through the darkened streets, the only light the faint glow of bioluminescent flowers. It was the quiet before the storm. The palace's gleaming towers loomed in the distance, but Kayleigh didn't look back. The mountains awaited them, a place where they could rebuild and plan, away from the prying eyes of the kingdom and the looming threat of Arkel. But as they reached the edge of the city, the distant sound of marching feet carried through the night. The Plexus army was already here. Kaylee's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted through the winding streets of the capital, the distant sound of Arkel's soldiers chasing them like an ever-present storm. Finn's voice echoed in her mind. Get to the mountains. I'll hold them off. But Kaylee's couldn't just leave him behind, not now, not when everything had come this far. She glanced back over her shoulder, the faintest glimpse of Finn's silhouette standing against the backdrop of the glowing city, a weapon drawn in his hand. Her pulse quickened, her feet moving faster as she pushed herself harder. No, not without him. She reached the edge of the city, where the streets faded into the thick, mist-covered forests that led to the mountains. The air was damp, cool against her skin. She could hear the rustling of leaves, the creak of trees bending under the weight of the wind. But no matter how fast she ran, the sound of pursuing soldiers grew louder. Kaylee's was torn. Every part of her screamed to run and leave Finn to his fate, to escape to the mountains where they could figure out what to do next. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Not when he had risked everything for her, when he had seen her as more than just a broken princess. She stopped, heart hammering, hands shaking. The decision had to be made now. She turned around, staring into the darkened city behind her, the flickering lights barely visible through the trees. Finn's voice, steady and resolute, rang in her ears. Go. But as she hesitated, something else caught her attention. A movement, flashes of red and gold. Jaren's soldiers had surrounded Finn. The ambush had worked. They were too many. Before she could take a step back, a loud shout broke through the night air. Kaylee's, you think you can run? You think you can hide? The voice was unmistakable Jaren. The soldiers had positioned themselves around Finn, trapping him in a semicircle. Kaylee's breath hitched. If she didn't act now, he would be captured, or worse. Go, Finn shouted, his voice filled with defiance. This is your only chance, you have to leave. But Kaylee's couldn't. The fear, the guilt, all of it surged within her, and in that moment her mind made up for her. She took a step toward him, then another, her feet carrying her back toward the fight. Jaren's smug face appeared through the trees, flanked by two of his elite soldiers. So, the princess returns. You know, I thought you had more sense than this, Kaylee's, but perhaps your broken wings have made you foolish. I'm not your possession, Jaren, Kaylee's replied, her voice low but firm, her wings flickering with the subtle hum of energy. I am no one's pawn. Jaren laughed, his voice rich with superiority. No. Then why do you keep running to me, Kaylee's? You were nothing before me. Without my kingdom's protection, your future would be nothing more than a distant memory. Your wings, your people, they're all gone, and you, he motioned toward Finn with a smirk, are throwing your last chance away for a broken human. The insult burned through her, but it also ignited something deeper inside her, something that had lain dormant for far too long. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She had a chance to change everything. She had a choice now. Finn, she whispered, her voice barely audible as she moved closer to him. He met her gaze, and for the briefest moment, she saw the same fire in his eyes that had pushed her to keep fighting. I'm not leaving you behind, she said, louder now, more sure of herself. Not now, not ever. Finn's expression softened, a hint of a smile on his lips despite the circumstances. Then let's finish this. Kaylee's wings flickered once more, a surge of energy coursing through them. She could feel the tension, the weight of every decision she had made in the last few days, every battle she had fought. She couldn't go back to the life she had known, and she wouldn't let Jaren or anyone else dictate her future. With one final, determined breath, Kaylee's launched herself into the air. It was clumsy at first, a reminder of how much she had to learn again, but the mechanical wings she and Finn had worked so tirelessly on responded. The wind lifted her higher, the world below her shrinking as she ascended, her wings pushing through the resistance with more strength than she had ever known. The soldiers beneath her shouted in disbelief as she soared above them. Jaren's face twisted in anger and frustration, but Kaylee's didn't look back. She didn't need to. Finn, however, was still surrounded, his back to the soldiers who were beginning to close in on him. Kaylee's gritted her teeth, hovering just above the group. She could feel the strain in her wings, the lingering doubt in her muscles, but she pushed it all aside. With one smooth motion, she swooped down, her wings cutting through the air, sharp and precise. The soldiers below barely had time to react before she barreled into them, scattering them to the side. Finn took advantage of the opening, his weapon flashing in the dim light, taking down two of the soldiers with swift precision. Go, Kaylee's shouted, urging Finn to run toward the cover of the forest. We can't stop them all. Get to the mountains. Finn didn't hesitate. He ran with Kaylee's, moving swiftly through the trees, dodging and weaving as they fought their way towards safety. The sound of Jaren's voice and his soldiers' pursuit grew fainter behind them, but Kaylee's knew this wasn't over. Not yet. They reached the edge of the forest, where the dense trees opened up to reveal the jagged, towering peaks of the mountains. The path ahead was treacherous, narrow, winding, and filled with sharp rocks and dense vegetation. It was their only escape, and if they made it to the higher altitudes, they would be harder to track. "We can make it," Finn said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Kaylee's glanced back over her shoulder one last time, seeing the distant shadows of Jaren's forces still following them. They had to reach the mountains, and fast. Every step, every breath counted now. The ground beneath Kaylee's and Finn trembled as the distant rumble grew louder. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the mountains, whipping their clothes and hair about. The air was thin, but Kaylee's barely noticed. Every step, every heartbeat was focused on one thing: survival. Behind them, the Arkell forces weren't far behind. They had managed to evade the immediate threat, but Finn had been right. They weren't alone anymore. The sound of another explosion, followed by the rapid thrum of approaching ships, made it clear. Arkell had sent reinforcements, and with them, a new threat, heavier, more determined. Kaylee's and Finn hurried up the narrow, rocky path. The mountain terrain was unforgiving, with sharp cliffs and jagged rocks that threatened to tear at their clothes. But they didn't slow down. Their only hope now was to reach the hidden caves farther up the mountain, where Finn had once worked on old tech during his time as a mechanic for the Resistance. It was a place that offered a chance, if they could get there. "We need to move faster," Finn said, his voice strained as he helped Kaylee's over a rocky outcrop. "If they catch us here, we're dead." Kaylee's nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. Her wings, though functional, weren't fully ready for sustained flight. The adjustments they'd made together had restored some of her strength, but she wasn't capable of evading an entire battalion of Arkell soldiers in the air. Not yet. The mountains, however, offered a temporary advantage. Their enemies wouldn't be able to land their full forces at the heights Kaylee's and Finn were climbing. The terrain was getting steeper, the air thinner, but Kaylee's didn't let that stop her. Her wings flared slightly as she used them to maintain balance, but each movement was careful. She couldn't afford to risk them breaking again, not when they were so close to their goal. Finn kept glancing over his shoulder, eyes sharp and alert. He was focused on the path ahead, but couldn't ignore the distant thrum of enemy engines growing louder by the minute. The reinforcements were catching up. "We need a plan," Finn said, breathless from the climb. "We can't outrun them forever. We're going to have to fight." Kaylee's shook her head. "I won't fight them, not yet." Her voice was steady, but the weight of her decision pressed on her chest. She had fought too much already. She wasn't going to let Jaren's forces decide her future. "We need to reach the cave. It's our only chance." They pushed forward, climbing steadily, until they reached the narrow entrance of the cave that Finn had described. It was barely visible, tucked between two massive boulders, almost hidden from view. They stepped inside, the cool darkness wrapping around them like a cloak. Kaylee's paused for a moment to catch her breath, her wings still humming faintly in the quiet of the cave. Finn moved ahead, pulling out a small torch from his pack. The flame illuminated the walls, revealing the rough, jagged interior of the cave. It was bigger than Kaylee's had anticipated, stretching deep into the mountain with hidden chambers. "Stay close," Finn said. "I'll activate the old systems here. We can use the tech to send a signal. Maybe we can reach some of the Kyleth resistance. They've got to know we're here." Kaylee's nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She had always thought of herself as a princess, someone with a kingdom to protect. But in that moment, standing in the heart of the mountain, she realized something that had been growing inside her for days. She wasn't just a princess. She wasn't a tool to be used by the Arkell king. She was a force of her own making, a woman with a purpose. She had always been afraid of what was broken in her, her wings, her past, her role in the world. But now she saw those things as parts of her strength. Her wings were a symbol of freedom, not weakness. She didn't need Arkell or any kingdom to define her. She could choose her own path. As Finn worked at a console hidden deep inside the cave, Kaylee's allowed herself a brief moment of peace. The outside world felt far away, the distant sound of Arkell's ships muted by the stone around her. She focused on her wings, testing their movement, feeling the wind stir as they shifted. The mechanics Finn had installed were working, though they still needed fine-tuning. The promise of flight was just within reach, but she needed time. Time they didn't have. Suddenly the cave trembled again. Kaylee's froze, her senses sharpening. The sound of engines grew louder, not from above, but from below. "They're coming in from below," Kaylee said, her voice urgent. "We need to move now." Finn looked up, his eyes widening as he realized what she meant. "The entrance, the tunnel, it's compromised." Kaylee's moved quickly, grabbing Finn's arm and pulling him toward the deepest part of the cave. They had to find another exit, one that wasn't already being targeted. But as they moved further into the cave, the walls began to shift. A low, rumbling sound echoed, and suddenly a section of the stone wall before them began to break apart, revealing an ancient lift system. Finn's eyes lit up. "This way," he urged, pulling her toward the lift. "We can use this to escape to the higher cliffs." The lift was old, clearly abandoned, but it still worked. The cables creaked as they descended deeper into the mountain, the sound of Arkel's forces growing fainter above them. They weren't out of danger yet, but for the moment they had escaped. As the lift descended, Kaylee's mind raced. They were getting closer to the Kylith resistance. If they could make contact, if they could reach out to them, then maybe, just maybe, they could stop Arkel's grip on her people. The lift reached its destination, a narrow ledge overlooking a vast chasm. It was a perfect vantage point. They were safe for now. Kaylee's exhaled, the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had come so far, but the path ahead wasn't easy. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom anymore. She was fighting for her people. She was fighting for the future. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The explosion rumbled through the cave, shaking the very foundation of the mountain beneath their feet. Kaylee stumbled, but Finn's strong grip steadied her as she regained her balance. The sharp crack of stone echoed through the narrow passages as a deep fissure formed in the ground between them and the path forward. "They're getting closer," Finn whispered, his voice tight with urgency. The ground continued to tremble, and the distant sound of Arkel's soldiers reverberated through the stone. They had no more time to waste. Kaylee's heart raced as the reality of their situation sank in. Jaren had found them. His forces were closing in, and their only escape now was through the mountains, a path that was rapidly being sealed off. She felt the weight of the moment bearing down on her. They couldn't outrun them. They couldn't fight them all. "We can't stay here," Kaylee said, her voice steady despite the growing panic. "We need to find another way out. There must be something higher up, something they haven't discovered yet." Finn's eyes flicked to the narrow passageway ahead of them, barely visible in the flickering light. "If there's a way, it's through the cliffs, but I've never been this far up. The Kylith used to have a safe house in these mountains. If it still exists, we might find shelter there." Kaylee's took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear that had started to claw at her. She knew they didn't have the luxury of second-guessing. The only option was forward. "Then that's where we're going," she said, her voice firm. "We move now." The narrow path up the mountain grew steeper and more treacherous as they ascended, the rocky terrain making every step a challenge. Kaylee's wings, though more functional than before, were still stiff, and she had to concentrate on each movement to prevent herself from losing balance. The air was thin, and every breath felt like a battle. Behind them, the sound of Arkel's soldiers grew louder. The explosion had triggered an avalanche of rocks, which made it harder for them to climb, but it also gave them a temporary advantage. The soldiers would be slowed down by the rubble. They had a brief window to reach the Kylith's safe house, but that window was closing fast. Finn, leading the way with a steady hand, glanced back at Kaylee's. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her chest tightened with the strain of their climb. "I'll be fine, just keep moving." They climbed higher, their bodies slick with sweat from the effort. The air was cold now, the wind biting at their exposed skin. Kaylee's felt the sting of the wind against her face and the occasional gust that threatened to knock her off course. But she pushed through, focusing on each step, each breath. Hours passed before they finally reached a plateau at the top of a cliff. The landscape before them opened up into a breathtaking view, a wide, expansive valley surrounded by towering peaks. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, their snow-capped tips gleaming under the pale light of the setting sun. At the far end of the plateau stood a small structure, hidden among the rocks, its edges worn by time but still standing strong. It looked like an ancient observatory, long abandoned but still intact. Kaylee's could feel the pull of hope in her chest. This was it, the Kylith safe house. Finn approached the door cautiously, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Kaylee's heart raced as he gently pushed the heavy wooden door open, revealing a dimly lit room inside. The air was stale but warm, and the faint smell of old machinery filled the space. The walls were lined with outdated technology, wires hanging loosely from the ceiling. "It's not much," Finn said, his voice echoing in the empty room. "But it'll do for now." Kaylee stepped inside, her eyes taking in the surroundings. There was something oddly comforting about the place. Even though it had been abandoned for years, it felt like a safe haven, a sanctuary. She let out a long breath, the weight of the climb and the danger momentarily forgotten. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax. Finn moved toward a control panel on the far wall, his fingers dancing across the buttons. The lights flickered on, casting an eerie glow across the room. Kaylee's gaze wandered to the shelves stacked with old equipment, tools, and devices she didn't recognize. "We can send a signal from here," Finn said, working quickly. "I'll reach out to the Kyleth forces, let them know we're here." Kaylee's nodded, but her mind wasn't entirely on the signal. Her thoughts drifted to Jaren. She knew his pursuit wouldn't end with this safe house. He would keep coming, relentless and determined to bend her to his will. Her wings might have been repaired, but they were still far from perfect. She wasn't ready to face him in a full battle. But there was something different now. For the first time, she felt like she had control over her own destiny. Finn's voice broke through her thoughts. "The signal is ready. I'm sending it now." Kaylee's watched him for a moment, the flickering light from the control panel casting shadows across his face. He was focused, determined, just like her. But she also saw something else in him: trust. He trusted her even when he had no reason to. He was putting his faith in her just as she had begun to put her faith in him. The sudden shriek of a transmission cut through the silence, and Kaylee's heart skipped a beat. "They've received it," Finn said, looking at the screen. "It's a good signal. The Kyleth forces are acknowledging our position." Kaylee's breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. There was no time to celebrate yet. The sound of footsteps outside the safe house reached them, faint but unmistakable. "They're here," Finn said, turning to her. "We don't have much time." Kaylee's hand instinctively went to her wings, the mechanical adjustments humming beneath her skin. She knew she wasn't ready for an all-out battle, but she wasn't going to run anymore. She had something to fight for now. She had a choice. And no one, not Jaren, not anyone, was going to take that from her. Cliffhanger, the door to the safe house suddenly creaked open and a figure stepped inside. It was Jaren, flanked by several of his soldiers. His expression was grim, but there was a spark of something else in his eyes, something darker, more dangerous. "Kaylee's," he said, his voice low and mocking. "You can run as far as you want, but in the end, you'll belong to me." Kaylee stepped forward, her wings unfurling slightly, the hum of energy vibrating through the air. Finn stood beside her, ready to fight. "We'll see about that," Kaylee's replied, her voice steady. This time she wasn't backing down, not from him, not from anyone. The final showdown had begun.